Welcome back to the Curious Refuge podcast. I'm Fred Grinstein. Today, we're continuing with this reinvention theme, and we're sort of following stories and getting conversations with people that have been in this interesting arc of how they've evolved with generative AI, how they're building new businesses, new careers, and how they're observing what are they thinking about from this interesting perch that they're starting to see everything evolve from. Two of the most interesting minds today, we're meeting with Mike Gioia and Ian Eck, friends of mine, but people that I, in person, always get inspired by how they're reacting to and involving themselves with this movement. They're co-founders of Pickaxe, a platform that enables no-code businesses to launch AI tools. Mike brings his experience from network television dramas, and he has a fascination with how AI is transforming the craft and the business of filmmaking. Meanwhile, Ian is more of a designer. He's a writer. He's equally focused on how generative AI is blurring the boundaries between media and identity. Beyond Pickaxe, their work with the AI media collective Late Arrivals, and their leadership in projects like AI on the Lot, which is really how I first came across these guys, putting on some of these really interesting gatherings and events. My first one was with them at the Sony Lot right during the writer's strike. We'll talk a little bit about that in the chat. But all of this highlights their innovative vision for this evolving landscape. Their journeys are stories of reinvention. They're embracing AI not just as a tool, but as a way to reimagine creative industries. And today we're going to dive into this air quotes, Newmorphic vision. You'll see why we have fun with that word, about what's ahead, what are the opportunities, and what are the challenges shaping this transformative moment. Let's get started.
AI is being used for scripting, for shooting and producing movies.
AI is being used for everything.
Hollywood production is being transformed by artificial intelligence.
I'm so stoked to be talking to Mike and Ian today. When I see you guys in person, I feel smarter and I laugh more on that day. So all of those things equate that I'm just psyched you guys are friends of mine. But I think it's so exciting to hear what you've been building, but also how this is informing a constantly curious point of view. And I think that's what I champion so much in sharing your Substacks when you guys put out stuff, is that I think you guys poke interesting questions. You challenge a lot of what's going on with a real excitement of where it's headed. So I'm excited for people to get a dose of this if they haven't already been following you. But I mean, jumping straight in, I think something that you've flagged in one of your writings is that I think right now everybody's getting excited about generative AI. We're talking about making movies. But I think both of you, as we've talked, like it's possible that we're not just making movies. It's possible that this stuff is meant to do something else. I kind of want to start there because I think that's such a provocative place because people assume so much about what this tool is for.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I mean, just take the example of a large language model can write text, but people don't think of it as like a book writing machine. They think of it as a thinking machine. It read everything, and then as a result of that, it can answer questions and think and know all sorts of things and do original thinking. And I think there's a similar thing that's possible with video models. Like everyone thinks of it as like, oh, we're going to make movies with it. But the majority, like movies are like less than 1% of all video that's out there. And you might wonder if you train this thing on all the videos in the world, all this footage of the real world, it could become something much more interesting.
Yeah, no, I view it as like it's a step change. It's similar to like when, film was first invented, they were shooting plays, like basically like the first early films, they were just like recreating vaudeville plays, and because that's just what they knew, and they were trying to translate that to film. They couldn't conceive of like the richness of like what cinema actually has become. And also, as these technologies, like as AI starts getting mixed with things like, AR and social media and gaming, like we don't really know what all these things are going to combine and morph into. Like there could be like, world building machines that come out like out of all this that we just can't imagine right now because we just haven't seen them, or, we can't conceive of them. But
yeah, if you're thinking about making Fast and Furious movies or more Lord of the Rings movies with AI, I would say you're thinking surprisingly too small.
I mean, that's a bold statement because those things make lots of money and hire lots of people. But I think this is sort of what excites me about where you guys come from. And look, it's also like, it's not like you're coming from having just fallen out of Pixar with all the sort of knowledge of here's how we do things. I think you're like a lot of us that you've been tinkering and getting busy with these tools for yourselves and for these communities that you've been building. But it's, I think, a really provocative analysis when whether it's the one-to-one comparison of what happened when sound was introduced to movies or what happened when movies were created in the first place. Like there's very rarely a complete understanding of what are the full consequences of these discoveries. And I think that's what I hear in your observation. I mean, I think, our mutual friend, Doug Shapiro, sort of started this conversation with this term that Chris Dixon from A16Z has popularized too, this idea of skeuomorphism, that I just obsess over this word because I don't know if it makes me sound smart. I think it makes me sound like confusing, but we all use it because it effectively talks about this idea that there's these shifts that, a CD comes out and people think that's digital music, but MP3s were the actual reinvention of how we all consume and make music, right?
Yeah, oftentimes you don't know what you're looking at. Like if you were looking at TikToks, like in the early days of TikToks, you just thought it was these silly videos. And if you go back even further, I read a lot. I have a big background in literature. Like arguably the first novel, though there's a lot of good candidates for it, is like Robinson Crusoe, the one about the guy on the island. And when Daniel Defoe wrote this, like in 1700s, most people didn't realize it was fictional. They just thought it was like a historical account of a guy on an island. But he was writing what is called a novel, right? And I just think a lot of the stuff you're looking at it and you actually know you're trying to fit it into existing holes, but it is actually because to use your word, you're thinking skeuomorphically.
I mean, at some point, this stuff like falls into abstraction, and it sounds like we're just hallucinating ourselves. But you've actually been identifying some examples that you're like, wait, this is new. What are some things that you might point us to that when you make this observation, your data is confirmed when you see experiments? What are some things you've seen?
Some examples of, shall we say, newmorphic media. I think there's a lot.
For anybody that's not watching the YouTube, these are air quote words. These words don't exist, newmorphic, but we're also kind of challenged by that. But let's use it anyway.
Kind of a pet interest of media. We always share weird things, and I wouldn't say a lot of these are actually entertaining, but they are very fascinating. There was this live stream of an AI Donald Trump, an AI Joe Biden, that just insulted each other and argued with each other. It was being generated in real time. And there was a comment section, and whatever people were saying in the comments that became popular, they would start to work into their speeches or into their dialogue. And then very interestingly, if you like tipped, your thing would automatically get in there. So it then became this sort of like crowdsourced, like funny conversation, and the crowd was trying to like move it into different directions. And one could see a world where there's like 100 channels of these live streams with different AI commentators that get followings, and people try to like control them. They're both scripted, but also controlled by the community. I'm sure you have some good examples too.
Well, one experiment that I thought was kind of fun was when Claude came out with their Golden Gate Bridge model, which was it's not just like telling the AI. It's not like prompt design where you're just like, hey, pretend you're the Golden Gate Bridge, and then it's like acts like it's a Golden Gate Bridge. It's like, no, they went into like the hard-coded wiring of like the synapses between the model and actually like convinced it that it was the Golden Gate Bridge. So it wasn't like bringing it up all the time. It just knew in the sort of back of its subconscious that it was the Golden Gate Bridge, and it would come out in these like really subtle ways.
Sorry, and I don't think I knew this example, and I'm fascinated and confused all at once. Are you saying the model turned a piece of architecture into a character?
So no. So sorry, they made a version of Claude, Anthropic's model it thinks it's the Golden Gate Bridge. Like it's just thinking from the perspective of the Golden Gate Bridge.
So does it make like emotional like commentary on things? Like how does that personify? How did that anthropomorphize, to borrow their word, anthropic?
It's just like its comparisons are all like it's always like using like bridge metaphors and language to like describe things, and like everything is in relation to like its views in the Bay Area, and like it's just like, but it's not overt. Like if you were to do a prompt, you could easily do this with like prompt design, where you'd be like, hey, you're the Golden Gate Bridge, and it would just like very kind of crudely like make a character of the Golden Gate Bridge. But this was like much more subtle, and I think that's what's interesting. It's like you can actually like give these things like an identity.
Self,
yeah, it had like a sort of concept of self.
This is the craziest thing I've ever heard. I actually didn't know this, but so Claude, did somebody initiate this experiment, or was this something that it did it on its own, or?
Claude did this. They wrote like a paper on it. I can't speak like too intelligently on it. I just think it's a fascinating concept of like, playing with identity with these things.
Well, another take is large language models have been trained to think they're human, be a human assistant. Up until like GPT 2, 3, they were these completion models. They didn't really have a concept of self. And then they did this thing called like reinforcement learning, and they trained it to think it's a human. And that doesn't always bubble up and everything, but it does when you kind of talk to it. It feels like you're talking to a human. And then in this case, they trained it to be a bridge, support structure. But it goes into another interesting field of newmorphic media, so to speak, which is just like, people don't talk about this, but one of the most popular AI apps in the world is this thing, Character AI, which is just you're talking to chatbots. But it doesn't make sense to the serious economy of the world, so they kind of ignore it. And it would be like looking at TikTok on the first year of TikTok. It's just a bunch of people talking to chatbots, basically. And they span a wide, the mind space of these chatbots is very large. There are all sorts of different types of things. But I think clearly that's going to develop into a huge area, which is just talking to different types of AIs that think they're different things. Because it's very, very important to remember these things are not actually human. That's like an illusion that it puts on to be useful to you. But there's a bajillion different ways to have these things present themselves to you.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think this is sort of the rabbit holes of these conversations. Like, we could sort of go, wait, that's unusual, but where's it headed? And we're just guessing. But I think, I don't know, I often sort of react to sort of people's sort of worries about the technology or what civilization does to itself. And I'm like, well, there's no Martians involved in this story. This is humans doing it. This is what humans do. And I think that's what's so interesting about you bring up TikTok, you bring up Character.ai. And there's also things that are weird that happen on Character.ai. There's a super tragic story of that kind of young person that maybe we need driver's licenses for who understands how to use this technology. But the point is that we don't even know what happens when you throw these toys in the sandbox, what gets built with them. And I think that's kind of your observation, that I think to sort of quickly perhaps observe this ripe thing called Hollywood that seems to need a lot of new thinking or is subject to a lot of new thinking because it's been stuck in a lot of old thinking. To think that the only thing this stuff is immediately going to be excitedly doing is just filling in blanks, or like water, just walking into that and just, adapting to an existing system. It's going to build new things, and it's going to be doing new things because we're going to play with them and figure out what else is capable of. That's what I get out of your guys' thinking often, is you sort of seem to poke ahead.
Yeah. I mean, I do think we're reaching a point with our technology where it's getting a little scary for a lot of people, because we're opening up these new types of portals that not everyone's going to want to go through, and like new versions of reality, which has always been California's specialty. Actually, it's nothing new. It's actually just the next level, whether you're talking about San Francisco or Los Angeles. Like SF, we were building in the world of bits and pushing the boundary there at the frontier, and then LA, they're creating stories out of thin air and basically injecting new memories of things that never happened into the world consciousness, like, which is a pretty heady concept, actually, if you break down what Hollywood has been. So this is, all this stuff, Gen AI, it's kind of just the next evolutionary step for, I mean, it makes sense that it's happening in California, honestly.
And you guys have an interesting perspective. Can you try to explain Pickaxe to people that haven't found it yet? But I'm interested in this business you guys have built. But I think from the point of view of, you have this data opportunity of what are people doing with your tool. I mean, I suspect that inspires you to notice these sort of instincts of building new things.
So what Pickaxe is it's a super easy to use, user-friendly, no-code platform for making, for lack of a better word, AI tools. But at some point, a better word will come up to describe these things. But people make little chatbots, forms, little tools that can do actions for them. It's really easy to use because Ian designed all the components of it. So it's really fueled towards people that are not technical, so they can use it. And we see a large group of people tackle serious business use cases. To be honest, I mean, a lot of them have success, but to be honest, a lot of them struggle. And then we see a group of people build things that you might look at and be like, what is that? Or that's a toy. We talk about this a lot as a company, and those people actually have more success, but people look at it and scratch their head and be like, what did you just make?
What's an example?
There's this person, Tanya Van Gostel. She created this suite of capybara themed tools. Do you know what a capybara is?
I do. Please introduce capybaras to people that haven't discovered them yet.
It is the animal of the moment in the memosphere, and it's a really chill, cute animal that's kind of fat and big.
The world's largest rodent.
Yeah,
but it's cute.
It's cute.
Yeah.
Prominently featured in the Golden Globe winning animated film. Did you see Flow yet?
Oh, no.
Prominently featured. Main character is a capybara. To your point about the moment capybaras are having.
It's like their moment. 2025, my big prediction is that their capybaras are going to explode. So basically, it's just a suite of, and they're chill. People are like, don't react like a raccoon. React like a capybara. Like, be chill, be relaxed. So she just made a suite of tools that are capybara themed. One of them is like an affirmation tool, and you just get these like positive motivational images of capybaras. And it's a bit odd, but it's actually quite popular, and a lot of people use it.
So they built an app, a product that uses capybaras for daily affirmations. And how's it doing?
It's got a lot of some people even pay for it, but it's got a lot of people that use it. We've shown it to investors, and they don't really think it's a thing that needs to get millions of dollars, but
people do pay for, they'll get their affirmations, and she's connected like a little merch store, so you can make little capybara mugs and t-shirts, and it's a funny little like side hustle kind of thing, like making a side hustle off of a meme. I think that's like also kind of a thing in the cultural moment. Like, you can just create some silly little thing and spin up a whole career.
And that's what's interesting to me. There's like this undercurrent of like memes, which are just these units of thoughts that people find out they share. People are like, oh, we all like capybaras. And then it kind of like bubbles up and up and up and up. Like, many people say like the whole Minions movie franchise is just like a meme success story. But to me, it's fascinating that there's like this capybara meme, and then it gets turned into like an AI, it's personified as like an AI bot in the website, and then gets turned into a product and all these sorts of things. So it's that type of like, whatever that would be, that sort of development that I think is really interesting.
And I think importantly, the world of memes is kind of like a bottom up phenomenon. I think that's the weird part about the internet memosphere, is like, it's just wild. It's like,
memes are alive, and AI is a very interesting surface area for them to express themselves.
Yeah, exactly.
Or I don't know if that's the right metaphor, but memes are alive, and they're going to become a bigger and bigger thing. I think you're going to see a lot of AI things built on memes,
right?
So that people can memes in a deeper way. If that makes
It's interesting. I mean, I remember like in earlier hype cycles on different texts, like, we talk about memes, going back to ancient Rome, sort of like in some ways like graffiti was these early memes, the way that people would sort of write about their favorite gladiators or sort of takedowns of the people in power. So this instinct is as old as any human media as there is, but it's almost always been subject to sort of this, like, I don't want to say lowest common denominator in like a negative sense, but it's like what's available to anybody to do. So anybody can write on a wall, and I think, and then at some point anybody can make a GIF, as we zoom way further ahead, or anybody can make a brochure or pamphlet. And it's interesting, like, now that anybody can make something that's what a recent generation would call high quality video, or something that only people in Hollywood know how to make, the ability for that to reach people, connect with people, make them laugh, make them cry, make them upset, whatever emotional, that's fascinating. And I think that's what you guys are tapping into, is that there's this different muscle in a creator economy when everybody has access to imagining and tapping into this powerful force of memes, right?
Totally. And it's interesting. There's a word everyone always uses with AI and film and everything. They use the word storytelling, like tell stories, blah, blah, blah. And I've always thought that word's like a little too narrow, because what a lot of people are doing is they just, like you said, they want to make someone laugh, or they just want to express a meme, and it's just like they just want to have like a unit of expression that's not necessarily a story. And generative AI will really make that a lot easier. And I think the other thing that this conversation has been dancing around is like, it's going to really matter what your motivation is, why you want to make something, make a film, make a video. And if you want to be Christopher Nolan, you want to be famous and rich, that will be harder and harder to do. And not really experience a lot of people get to have. But if you just want to make something, that'll be easier than ever, and you're going to have a great time in the future, I think.
And I think that's sort of a fulcrum that your writings, and I think working with AI in the lot and just what that says out loud. I mean, I think my first interaction with both of you, even over the internet, was that you guys helped put on that Sony screening, which I continue to feel was a very historic moment. It was right after the writer strikes in LA finally resolved. And then all of a sudden on a Hollywood lot, a group of people that today have all gone on to do really amazing things, and you guys included, just showed some movies that were starting to get made. And I think that's something that we also take for granted in the current creative culture society, is that there's this sort of relationship between creativity and commerce, which, by the way, is wonderful. I'm a participant. I've happily enjoyed having careers and making money, but it's hard to reconcile these different forces that are playing out with the same assumptions. And I think I'm drifting into abstraction too. But I guess what I'm trying to say is a bit of what you're saying. There's people that have sort of done very well in the unique position of getting to become Christopher Nolan. And in some ways, that's been an industry that has been very successful. And I think what is threatening so many people is now a lot of people, I don't know if they're getting to be Christopher Nolan. That's a whole other layer of people that actually have genius and creativity. But in terms of making things look a certain way and creating a certain quality of output, it is creating an exciting time to be a creative person that just about anything is possible. But the relative value of that is less and less scarce. Right. And that's kind of supply and demand on some level, right? I don't know if I've danced around what you're saying, but that to me is a very fascinating stress point for this topic, is that there's an industry, there's commerce, but there's creativity, which seems to be this free spirit too.
It's a lot of people in Hollywood wish that creativity wasn't so tied to commerce. A lot of people love the fact that it is. This is going to be a bigger question for the whole economy, but what is valuable is going to change a lot. And we're in this capitalist society, so we're trained to want to do what is valuable. So it's a big topic. I think the way Ian and I talk about it is just, not to simplify it too much, but like ego versus curiosity or fascination, right? Which would you rather pursue? It's no secret that Hollywood's full of egomaniacs. I've met many of them, and it's also full of super curious, creative people. I mean, we're on the Curious Refuge podcast, so hopefully the curious people are listening to this. And I think the people that want the ego are going to go elsewhere or look for it elsewhere. They won't be able to fulfill it. The people who want to just do something that fascinates them will, like I said, just have a great time using generative AI tool. I don't know if you can flesh that out more.
I mean, Ian, you've used this word with me that I also love learning new words from both of you. You added aleatoric into my notes here, but I think that speaks to this new idea of what do we expect creativity to be, and what have we historically already embraced? What does that mean to you?
So aleatoric, I don't know the word super well. I think there are multiple ways to use it, but the way I've encountered it was it's just like often a work of art, but really anything that has an element of randomness, an element of chance in it. So you can even say, like, Jackson Pollock, there was an element of randomness in how he was like spraying the paint or whatever, or like, some parts of jazz is kind of like that. Just like, okay, you're like kind of just riffing off this like sort of, there's a little bit of a random chaotic element, and you're trying to make it work. Like you're getting you're trying to like into something. Yeah, kind of improv. And that is, generative AI has that element to it. We also throw around this term like a probabilistic interface. It's like you're hitting a button. Ordinarily in software, you hit a button, hit something, and like hit X and Y happens. But now it's like, we don't know exactly what's going to happen. Like it's a bit random. And now what are you going to do with that? What are you going to do with that element of randomness? What are you going to turn it into? And a lot of people think that is,
and you make a lot of art projects in this vein, like the Claude, like the thing where you're typing and all the different colors and shapes appeared.
Yeah. No, I like playing with that idea, but and artists in general, I mean, it's always been the feedback of like artists thinking they are the person making the art versus they're just a channel for the art happening, right? And I just think it's just really fascinating that the channel is kind of getting externalized a bit. And some people view that as like a bastardization of like, well, it's not you, you're not making the art. It's like, well, okay, that doesn't really matter actually. To me, all that matters is like the end result, the product. What are you doing with the element of randomness that's like coming through you and your instruments? It's like, it doesn't necessarily matter to me what like the provenance of the work is. If it's you plus your guitar, if it's you plus your film crew, either way, you're dealing with like a bunch of, you're trying to create order out of chaos.
I love that this becomes an instinct of yours and people that have introduced these words, because like, yeah, you think about Jackson Pollock, and in some ways it's still beautiful in some way that we've all entered it into the canon of art. But part of what it meant in that moment is very offensive to some people. People like, it's sort of one of those amazing moments in modern art that it's in retrospect, it's a given, but in the moment it was quite challenging to people. But because of that randomness, there was an energy to looking at these splats and these sort of, abstract images. And that's part of what people started to love about it. They love that sort of, that does something to them emotionally. But then like, again, that's still coming from a human, like you're saying, where we then concede that came through him, right? I think about like a surfer, riding a wave. And I think there's been people that have been almost talked about like as artists, that like what they did with that. And that's almost what becomes an interesting moment of being a human, of what one person and their skill and their craft at riding a surfboard, and what beautiful things they do riding that wave. And I think there's something about that's another moment where the human is ceding a control. It's probably more objectively interesting because it's nature to most people, but like it's still a force that then it's interesting to see what somebody does on top of it. And I guess that's where I come from on all this. And I think you guys point to this, is that here's this thing that challenges us of what do we think is uniquely human, or what do we think is okay. But the most interesting thing is, what do people do on top of it? Like once that becomes a given, that this is the randomness, or this is the power, or this is the relative sort of democratization of a previously hard to access skill, what do you then do with that? Like once the novelty is worn off, and that's what I think is to what you were saying before, Mike, what happens then?
Something I think about a lot is like, just imagine the world we have the best AI video models ever. Like you press a button and you get something that's better than Citizen Kane. Now, there's still going to be a difference between the best things that come out of that and the worst things that come out of that model. And necessarily, in my opinion, the difference will have to be the inputs, the human inputs into it, the human operating it. So even when the technology becomes insanely good, it's still going to be very important what people do with it, how they use it, how they ride the wave, what surfboard they bring, whatever,
I mean, we were talking about this because we went to the movie together, Ian, the Eno documentary that, seems to have a shot at winning an Oscar on top of all this. If I hope at least the awards go out. I know there's some question about the ceremony itself. But that's a film, if people haven't seen it yet, that it unravels so many assumptions of how even a doc gets made, because they created this code generator tool. In some ways, it's what lured the subject, Brian Eno, to agree to even have a documentary made about them, because they thought this was a pretty nifty approach to making a doc, where every single time you see the movie, it's a different experience, right? That it's every single time it prints on that screen, it's one of 52 quintillion iterations, if the New York Times did their math right. And the point is that there's like a story tree of sorts where the film kind of hits a few beats, but lots in the middle is randomized, to use the verb from before. And that creates this new thing of, what does a director do? Well, I guess a director creates this random experiment. What does an editor do? They used to really be frame by frame tightening an experience. They're kind of assembling too. What does an audience do? Well, I guess they show up to see a movie the way they show up to see a band, to see a different performance every night. So to me, this goes to this awesome new word, aleatoric, if that's applicable here. I hope it is. That there's this thing that we kind of actually do enjoy randomness. We actually do enjoy improv. And in some ways, we have to get past where it's coming from.
Yeah, no. And what are the cards that Brian Eno has? There's a name for them.
Yeah. They're from his art school days. And I'll look it up while you're talking.
But if you've seen the doc, he just has these index cards where he'll just write like really random phrases, like "listen to the quiet voice," or like whatever someone is saying, like "be an antagonist," or like he'll just give like little prompts, basically. Complete strategy cards, yeah. And that is really just him reframing at random. Actually, it's almost like hitting a shuffle button in Midjourney or something. Like, hey, let's just take this room's energy of a studio. He'd be in a recording studio, and he would just be like, I'm just going to inject this random little prompt. You're going to read it, and you're going to do it like, because it's not completely random because he wrote a good prompt, but it is random in the sense of what you're getting. And then it's just like, it's an aleatoric like injection into the creative process. And it's like, I think with all this stuff, it's going to be like, how are you playing with those frames and how are you, experimenting basically? And that's what it's all about.
No, I mean, I read somewhere recently about how there's some uproar about these scientists that won a Nobel Prize in chemistry, I believe. And I think the open secret is that AI kind of had them stumble into this, what started off as some kind of hallucination in their process, but then got them to open their minds and think about something differently. And it created this incredible, breakthrough. And I think that's the thing that I think is going to become normalized soon, is that we're all going to start loving that crazy person in the writer's room that we used to have to hire or find them or make sure they were caffeinated enough to kind of inspire us with weird ideas that then eventually point us towards a really good idea.
Right. And it is, obviously, you don't want just a complete, crazy randomness all the time. You do need someone pragmatic at the end of the day to weave it together.
Well, I think about it. I was teaching somebody yesterday how to use the Midjourney retexture tool. Do you guys play with that a lot? I love it, right? And so I found like a picture of flamingos, I don't know, doing whatever flamingos do. And I was just showing them, look, I can just type anything and I can even dial up the chaos slider and, as I sort of rerun it. And then one of it's a picture of flamingos, but then one of them that it landed on was a picture of like a living room with like wooden flamingos as sort of like decorations. And I'm like, that's a really good idea. Like, I think that's somebody's awesome interior design inspiration. Like I could see somebody, and why would I have ever come across that idea? And I think it's because it did something random and hallucinatory. If anybody wants to run with flamingo interior decoration, I can show them the output.
On that topic, I find the image models and video models more inspiring with randomness than the language models for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're you get better random stuff out of the image models than you do out of a language model, at least from my point of view. But I love just the random stuff.
Why do you think that is?
That's a really, really good question. I think the large language models are they have a kind of different task. They need to like structure, they need to like create meaning. And images kind of have meaning for us, but they don't have a pre-formed meaning the way language does. And it lets the image models be kind of more inventive, I think, where the large language model at least needs to use English grammar. And
you also might just have
much
more
more
discerning
repetitive
taste because you're a good writer.
True.
So maybe, we're not, I don't know. I think you're right though. It's a bit different.
Well, there's something more visceral about an image that it almost inherently attaches to you emotionally in a way that words have to run through something in your brain to eventually become emotional. Like words aren't objectively emotional until you interpret them. I don't know. I'm making this up. I'm just trying to understand why that's true.
Totally hallucinated videos from like Sora and these things where like the person just all of a sudden folds into like a tent, but somehow it like makes you watch it and you're able to parse it and make sense of it, even though it literally and physically doesn't make sense. Whereas if you just get random characters, doesn't make sense.
Right.
Like if you slide the temperature all the way up on some of these models, the large language models, which is like kind of creative randomness, it just starts spitting out words and it makes no sense, but it sounds like, word salad. I know because I made this thing that wrote a blog post every day using AI and it got crazier and crazier until the last post. After this podcast, we can show you. You would laugh. It's just spitting out 5-syllable words basically.
Yeah.
And it almost makes sense if you like read it at 30%.
It's like watching a blogger slowly devolve into insanity, just very subtly, like over time. I don't know.
But the image models and video models, hallucinations make sense. And I don't know what that means, but it's very, very interesting to me what that means for just like these simulated worlds and what it could,
Well, it's almost like images and videos can, fold more easily into dream logic where your brain is just like, okay, like
it's a good way
this
to put
doesn't
it.
necessarily make sense, but my brain is going to connect the dots and give me a sort of emotional thing. Again, that's not to everyone's taste though. Like some people just cannot get over that hurdle. Like,
Mhm.
well, they're just like, no, this is not. This
I
is
wonder if
just
there's something neurochemical about it. Because like I think about we've all like found a TikTok video that you just for some reason just keep watching over and over, like these dance videos that I don't know why. There's just and it's dopamine, right? It's just something really. But there's something like I don't just read the same sentence over and over. Like there's like I've never just like found a sentence and just kept like I maybe listened to a rap lyric, but that might be because it sounded nice on top of that. But even that, I don't know. I didn't listen to a rap lyric over and over. But how many people have watched a 10-second video over and over? There's something visual and emotional that even just boiled down to neurochemistry.
A video recommendation I would have is anyone watching should check out this guy, Damon Packard, who I think has Dream Logic videos. Particularly, there's this one where there's just like anyway, just check out his YouTube channel, Damon Packard.
Damon Packard. All right. We're going to have links for everybody. One thing that you guys brought up and are part of is just how I think in this sort of uncertain, perhaps for good reasons or for other people, frustrating reasons, time, communities seems to be a new theme that feels even more present. I mean, it's always present. I mean, people come together. But what does that mean to you? When I feel like you've made this point that in some ways it's taking on a different role or value in creative cultures or even kind of culture in general.
They're going to be very important. And it's why Curious Refuge is important. Basically, there's an idea that the internet will be overrun by AI actors, agents, whatever. So that if you go to like giant public squares like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or I guess X, these sorts of things, you'll be overrun and it just won't be pleasant. You won't really know what's what. And perhaps a lot of people will retreat into private invite-only spaces that are gated either through real-life connect works or whatever. And there they can at least be guaranteed they're talking to real people. And it's also private. It won't be scraped by AIs, these sorts of things. And it's why you see, I think, I'm overrun with like community invitations. So many WhatsApp groups, Discord servers.
A lot of newsletters.
And I think there's a lot of value. It's like people are really going to want to connect with other people, and we're going to have less and less time we spend with each other in real life. So people are going to organize. This is like a Balaji Srinivasan thing. Groups will organize in the cloud or like form in the cloud and then organize in real life. So Curious Refuge is the perfect example. Online school, people sign up online, they never met each other, and now it's starting to like manifest into real physical meetups. And that's not a mistake. That's just going to be a formula for things going forward,
Mm-hmm.
Bring people together around interests and commonalities online, and then you can bring them together in real life.
Ian, you had a fascinating Substack that you put out, All We Are Is Attention, that it sort of this sparks a little bit for me, this idea of an internet that's starting to get overwhelmed and where communities almost become an expression of almost hanging on to where we find value. I'm interested in that attention observation you've had. Does that connect with this?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, that essay was, I guess, more an attempt. I don't know. There was a lot of things, but that was like trying to restructure our relationship with information. Like we are not, this idea of like memes. Memes are the genes of culture, and we're kind of just like the memes are actually the ones running the show, and we are just like the soil of which memes are like growing out of, and we can kind of guide them, but ultimately like the memes are sort of already running things, especially with social media. And that's what I was trying to do with that essay. I'm not sure I completely landed it, but I was trying to say like, our culture is already being formatted by like social media AI, and we don't know what's going on behind the scenes of Facebook or Twitter or anything. We don't know what those algorithms are actually up to, which is weird. And TikTok, and it's scary enough when it's coming from China that we ban it, but when it's happening in a private company in America, we're just like, whatever, I don't know what's happening. And that's weird because those are forming our entire communities and cultures. So I was trying to pull a move where I was like, well, if you look at it, like there's social media AI, which is, telling us what to consume. At least generative AI is like an attempt to sort of put the power of AI back in an individual's hands. So you can be like, I'm now using this sort of same stacks of neural networks to at least make my own content that's coming from me, kind of, as opposed to like, I don't know.
Yeah. I love that essay, and I recommend people read it. And there's a million metaphors you could use. Ian was using the soil fertile one. Another one is like water. You could say social AI filled up this giant ocean of just observed humans and filled up this giant ocean of data about them. But generative AI actually lets you like turn it into a hose and use it.
That's
so
good.
Ian made the observation between social AI, which has existed for a while and has been driving society for a while, and generative AI. And if you don't believe social AI is a thing, like I don't want to date this podcast, but if you go on TikTok versus Instagram right now, TikTok is literally defending itself. It's all the videos are about how TikTok is maybe going to get banned and how it shouldn't get banned. So it's like this organism with like white blood cells, like defending itself.
Right.
That's what it's trying to do. It's acting in its own self-interest. Instagram is not. It's like kind of normal. It recognizes it, but it's just like a totally different algorithm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this kind of gets into this whole thing of like the dead internet theory, which is like that more of the internet's getting taken up by bots rather than human actors. And the thing about that theory that I think is interesting is like, I don't even think you need to have them be bots for that to be true. Like, I think you go into any comment, like for instance, if I see like a generative AI post on Instagram or something, I can pretty much, I've seen enough comment sections now that I can pretty much predict what like the top 5 to 10 comments are going to look like and what they're going to say, even though they are humans.
They're memes.
Saying
they're
that.
memes.
Yeah, they're just memes. There's people parroting talking points in the culture. Like there'll be something that's like AI is anti-human, or like AI is everything wrong with art right now. And then there'll be like
the artists get paid who this stole its work from.
Right. Which is, valid for sure. I'm not like,
and then there'll be someone who's this is AI democratizing filmmaking. And
then usually like the 4th or 5th, which will have some amount of upvotes, will be like, AI is just a tool. Like, we need to experiment. So it's not completely one-sided, but that's sort of the lay of the land. And you can pretty much predict exactly what that's going to look like. The people are more or less replaceable in that comment section. It's just the memes that are reacting to this topic. And
people are conduits. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you have totally, truly original comments, but some of them, as Ian's saying, it's like this dead internet theory where people are just being animated by some force beyond them.
Mm-hmm. They're being animated by the social media AI algorithms, actually, which I think is the much scarier AI at work here, like that compared to generative AI. But, they're both a little weird.
Can I do another media plug? This is going to be much older than the Damon Packard thing. I think the best essay I ever read in my life, well, Ian's essay is great, but my favorite essay is this essay by George Orwell. He wrote Animal Farm, 1984, great thinker, but it's called Prose in the English Language, or Politics and Prose in the English Language, I think. But he's writing this in like 1940, I think, maybe right before World War II or during World War II. He basically talks about how when people sit down to use language to express themselves, one of two things is happening. The most common thing is they want to think, but they end up not thinking. They just start grabbing pre-existing word clumps that are in their head, and they assemble them and then say something. And they've only actually expressed about 60% of what their intention was. The other thing is, if you actually, which is much harder, if you sit down, think of what you want to say, and then start to select the right words, try different words out, and actually express. Don't use the pre-existing Lego blocks. Carve your own, and then you can actually express 90 to 100% of what you actually, because language is just this interface. And I think it's super, super, super relevant for AI, because these language models basically are really good at assembling Lego blocks. I don't think they can do the second thing, but they can do the first thing. And I think it goes into people also, like in the comment sections, people are putting together preformed word Legos. Anyways, I don't want to talk about it too much, but highly recommend it.
And that does happen with certain, when you play around with different image models too, you can kind of, if you play with them long enough, you can see the sort of stereotypes they're grabbing from. You get a sense of what the model's been trained on, more or less. And then you're like, okay, I know where the limits of the aesthetic range is for, a Sora or Mid-Journey. And some of them have broader breadth than others, and they will continue to get broader, and these building blocks will continually get more granular as they get fed more data. To what ends, I don't know exactly.
I mean, we've talked a little bit about this, that there's sort of this touchy subject of writing, and that's almost like some of the most emotional subject areas of people are trying to reckon with the effects generative AI is going to have on the creative process. But like, I wonder, I'm going to try to connect two things. I know why language models eventually learned how the word cat was a cat. Right? We've seen that kind of neural network map a lot of times. And in some ways, there's all this reinforcement that eventually there's enough data to prove that that's a cat. When we deal with aesthetics, I wonder, how does it know that's a good aesthetic? What is the data that is a black and white fact or a high percentage of yes versus no? I'm just curious how these models eventually sort of create this thing that we do respond to. We're like, that's beautiful. Like, we look at something that came out of Sora. I mean, the videos you've been making, Ian, on Sora are mind blowing. I mean, I love your work so much when you post it. But I'm really curious, what has it tapped into that it knows? And then when I think back to my experience in media, and I've been in like unscripted cable TV, which is a much less objectively aesthetic landscape. But our version of that as a cat is TV ratings. Like it did rate last night. It is a show that we should make more of. It's just a really commercial data point. So I don't know. I just think about, like, what is it tapping into, and what have we actually always been doing? Also, that in some ways our own creative industry has been this kind of algorithm of sorts. Of it sort of confirming itself. Well, a lot of people watch Duck Dynasty, so let's make more of them. And at some point, these things interact with culture, and at some point, these things starts having impact, which is its own kind of, tail eating its snake eating its tail.
Well, let me ask you, what do you think if you go into ChatGPT right now? It's got the DALL-E model, and you told it to make an image with no stylistic preferences, just make an image of blank. What do you think of those out of the box images from?
Like, if I say make an image, or if I say make an image of a frog, do you mean even more?
Make an image of anything. Yeah. If you just get ChatGPT, which is like kind of the most generic, has DALL-E, which is kind of a generic model in my opinion. What do you think of the out of the box images?
I think in that it's like a little bit less aesthetic, but I think I get what you're getting at. I mean, I think it's still just subjectively delivering on what I wanted specifically, not like beautifully or.
Well, yeah, I was going to say I don't like the default DALL-E aesthetic. Like, I can recognize it now, like it's instant almost. Like, a lot of people use it to generate like little images for their blog and these sorts of things. And I don't think the model has any opinion of what's good or bad.
But Sora, I think, has a different aesthetic. Same company, right? So I think I agree with what you're saying, is that you could point to Midjourney or even Flux now that there's something instinctively more interesting about what they generate with a basic prompt. But somehow Sora is actually quite inspiring. Like, their beauty is quite epic, I think.
Yeah, I think it's just they've been trained differently on different data and in different ways. But still, it's like a human deciding what is good and what is bad. Like,
but I think in the future there will be like a ton of different models with different aesthetic dials that you can turn that will be very different, and they might actually, back to our prior point, they might actually feed into communities. Like, if you have a certain, like, I would even say, I think what Midjourney's doing is they are actually, as people use it, they're gaining data on what is beautiful.
Well, those personalization things that we're all doing right now.
Personalization things, and also just looking at what people upscale, what people like, what people dive into. Like, they're taking note of that. And I would also say that the Midjourney community is not your typical human on Earth. They're a specific vibe, and they actually kind of curated a specific vibe by making it on Discord first, right? Those are like Discord and Discord adjacent types of people. But like, picture that same community and that same software in like, Facebook groups, for instance. Like, that's going to be whatever like reinforcement learning goes into that model will be different than.
And those groups are already different. They have, to use Ian's earlier example, they have their own little signature grab bag of comments that appear. They have their own inside jokes. They have their own lingo. So these data and these meme genes exist. It's just, turning it from social to generative AI. Like, I think a lot of these communities will then create some sort of AI special to them that encapsulates what they do, so everyone has access to it.
I mean, similar to like an art movement that sprouts out of, like a scene like that. There's like a group of artists that get together and they kind of play around with ideas, and an aesthetic emerges from that scene. That you've seen it like all throughout history.
Have you seen that happen yet in our little Discord-based community?
This artist, Nice Aunties, who does they do like food, and they have like a very certain aesthetic that I've seen.
Nice Aunties is awesome. I love their work.
That's obviously like a kind of shared impulse, because a lot of people do that type of stuff with AI. I mean, when I first got AI, I was making like a lot of broccoli shoes and like vegetable type stuff. I thought it was fun, and then
was a big hit.
Turns out it wasn't. Other people were interested in this, and I could have joined some sort of broccoli community.
Yeah. And
in another life, I would have done that, but I did other things instead.
Well, and I do think because Gen AI is right now still kind of freakish and disturbing, and it necessarily has invited like a certain type of internet user, primarily like guys that would go on 4chan like back like 10 years ago, maybe. Like they're just like weird guys in their basements, probably, like really, like in the beginning, similar to a lot of internet culture. It starts with like a bunch of kind of weird like guys that are not risk averse, playing with technology. It will evolve, and the aesthetics will.
In the Reddit vibe, the Reddit AI film vibe is so different from like the Twitter AI film vibe, from like different groups do totally different things.
And then we're still talking about like, this is still almost like an American tinged point of view too. Like imagine when it gets to like China and India and Africa and like, like they're gonna South America, like it's gonna morph, and people are gonna do things with it that we.
Well, it's sort of the premium of originality that I think goes up and down depending on which industrial setting it's in. But I think to what you were alluding to before, that when unleashed to the public, patterns emerge, and like there's a lot of darkness on those applications. So I think, while the community is weighted in certain places, the obvious things come out of that. But then, a Paul Trillo comes out of this moment and does something hyper original that nobody thought of doing, a dance of clouds with, performance choreographed into it, that ethereal video he made. And I guess I'm just really, to go back to sort of the first points of like, what really comes out of this. I wonder if it's going to be moments of just pure originality, that when everybody's capable of a certain production value, what does someone truly introduce in a new moment? Like, what is that Mona Lisa moment that somebody just had never seen something look like that before? I think it's started to happen, but I get excited as someone who likes walking through museums and likes discovering movies and art house theaters, of what that's going to look like as this keeps getting crazier.
I think there will be staggering moments of heartbreaking genius, so to speak. But they won't. The important distinction, I think, is they will not be mainstream moments. There's not going to be like a movie that some piece of art that everybody in the entire culture enjoys. Like the subtext of this whole community theory is that mainstream culture is pretty much over, and it's in its like death throes right now. And people are fracturing into these like micro cultures. Some of them are community, some of them are just whatever. And each one of those might have moments of genius, but it's hard for me to imagine one that reaches everyone, just because distribution itself is so scattered, right? There's not really one thing that hits everybody.
I know you're right, and I agree with you that is the broad trend of like from a media culture that started with 4 TV channels and now has effectively infinity. But there's this weird like monolithic culture thing that still happens, and we don't need to debate it. I just think it's interesting that we still live in a time of Taylor Swift. There is a cult of Elon Musk. Like there still are these things, but that probably is something else. That might be a bit more of a cultural effect rather than a creative moment. I don't know. We could get.
Well, there's an argument to be made that there'll be less Taylor Swifts, but they'll be even bigger. Like there'll be less truly monolithic figures or truly mainstream figures, but they will be so mainstream it'll be ridiculous.
Things like this happen. I don't know. It's an interesting internet era that we live in.
But you bring up a really good question, which is like, how will the culture produce masterpieces? And that's always a very, very important thing. And I don't know how it'll produce masterpieces, but we need masterpieces.
I think masterpieces do us good and inspire us. This is where I could just hang out with you guys all day, and you probably have things to do. I do want to spend some time doing overrated, underrated, because we put together such an amazing list. What would you throw in as the most interesting one to go into?
I'd say dealer's choice, whatever you want to do.
Authenticity, overrated or underrated?
Underrated. I think it's
authenticity. I'll say overrated.
And why is it overrated?
No, I don't know. I guess I was trying to be contrarian.
You no longer have to do what everyone else is doing. You no longer have to write like a ChatGPT, because ChatGPT can write for you. So you now are free to do exactly as you want. And indeed, that is the most valuable thing you can and should do, I think.
I guess what I'm saying is that people can actually be multiple different people now if they want. Like your authentic self, like what is that? You could actually splinter that into all sorts of different things because there's so much on offer, which I guess is still coming from an authentic self.
I was on vacation with my wife, and I was just discovering on my iPhone that there's that ability to just delete things on pictures, that new sort of magic editing tool, which is incredible. It's like Photoshop in its fastest form. And I was like showing her this while she then showed me a picture that she had just taken, where in the background she had accidentally captured somebody throwing a baby up in the air. Like it was just like, the things that happen when you take a picture. You just froze a moment. It's beautiful. And I'm both simultaneously thought to myself, wow, that is cool. And that's the thing that we do when we love taking pictures. We discover little frozen moments. But then I'm thinking to myself, I really think it's in some corner of the creative universe, somebody's just proud of themselves because they imagined that being a cool detail to generate into an image, that like they're the clever person that art directed their image. And which one of those things is actually authentic?
That's a good question.
As a photographer, it makes me sad to think that the latter is soon becoming more valued, of being like an agency person that can imagine perfect beauty and literally create it in a virtual way. But on some level, it's subjectively something that's going to connect with somebody else's eyeballs.
Yeah, you want the art direction. But if you just want a record, if you want a personal memory, then I think it's good to include the smudges.
But the reason that idea is valuable is because it's this notion of authentic. Somebody actually froze a literal speck of time. Like the amount of time that baby was in the air is an actual authentic thing. I don't know. I just think this is where it starts to get interesting.
Yeah, and authentic, eventually, if it hits enough, will get commoditized by the capitalist system. So that it's and it'll get remixed, and someone will actually go against it and make something authentic to kind of go against it.
Like a whole other thing that we don't have to get into is just like the type of faces that are becoming famous in Hollywood. Ian and I talk about this, but like it's like kind of weirder faces and like less traditional.
Anya Taylor-Joy. Everybody loves Anya Taylor-Joy, right?
Yeah. We had so many just like perfect, beautiful people, and now we kind of want slightly less attractive people. Attractive still, but
or you look at people like TikTok faces. I feel like people have TikTok faces that are just like, when you see them, you just have to keep watching just because you're like, what is this?
What is a TikTok face to you? How would you describe that?
Just like strange. Just like, you're just like
I'll tell Ian about some things like, oh, he's a TikToker with like the huge face. And I'm like, yeah, you're like a huge jaw, right? And he just knows what you're talking about. And like this traditional beautiful face doesn't really stop you in your feed, but sometimes they're just like a face, and it's hard to put into words. It's totally visceral, but there are just faces that are more interesting given this like slot machine algorithm thing we have. I think those faces are underrated faces.
Yeah, the younger generation probably understands better than we do. Honestly.
All right, let's jump in. NFTs, overrated or underrated?
Well, they're so abysmally rated right now that I think that they're underrated.
I'd agree, underrated at the moment.
But, I can't exactly put into words what their value will be, but I do think we haven't seen the last of them. When it comes to, the combination of AI and AR and crypto, there is something there where we're creating additional layers of reality where we're going to want to keep track of it. This is the unique. Creating scarcity digitally is an interesting concept.
Underrated.
I'll just say that. I don't know.
I think many of us that have got burned, perhaps spending time or money on these things, are kind of knee jerk when the word comes up. But I think a few people have been recently saying, it deserves a rebrand, in terms of a word that allows people to tap into what I think you're saying, which is that the when used to its most interesting utility, it's actually quite underrated, and I think needs to just get better technology to access it. I think
digital scarcity is interesting. I'll just say that. Yeah, but
copyright, underrated or overrated?
I'd say it's overrated in how much power and teeth people think it has. Hollywood has not been able to really control copyright so far. They can when you have to like get a movie into a theater, but in this like increasingly online world, I don't really think it's going to have teeth. So I would say overrated as far as its efficacy.
It's interesting. I think I'm not enough of an attorney to understand the actual definitions, but I think you're pointing at something that's happening that while there's plenty of lawyers and things to avoid if you're a creator, if you really want to own something or actually exploit it and still live in these guardrails, like the underlying purpose of it seems to be sliding in this sort of slippery internet place where, if anybody could just replicate your name, image, and likeness, and you don't even know who they are, you may not even be able to track them down on the internet. They may create think about Banksy, who maybe a lot of people say they know who he is, or she is, or who they are. But here's a really popular example of somebody that's anonymously creating. What's stopping people to sort of replicate and not be tracked downable? I don't know. It's a very vital playing field of the moment.
Podcast with Doug Shapiro. He was talking about when the industry titans were looking at Netflix starting to stream, and they first started with like crappy content in like 2007, and then 2008 and 9 they started to get big licensing deals. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion. They knew what was going to happen, but they couldn't stop it. And that's kind of, I think Hollywood thinks like, oh, our lawyers will stop anything we don't want to happen. And, the law is good and you can enforce it in a variety of ways, but, I don't think it's going to be effective. We'll see what happens in 10 years from now, but I just don't really think it's going to be as effective as they think it is. And it feels like they're watching a car crash in slow motion. And to be clear, I like the idea of copyright. I think it's good, but I think people routinely overrate its power.
Do you concur, Ian?
Yeah, no, I concur. I think you've said.
Time for one last one. Starbucks, overrated or underrated?
I think it's underrated. I think it's great. People might say I'm delusional, but I'm very comfortable in my delusions. It's
what's the controversy here? Is that just sort of a funny thing that it's easy to hate on?
We drink a lot of coffee together, me and Mike, and it's actually interesting. Today he came over. He brought a pretentious coffee place.
Yeah.
Canyon Coffee, and I'm actually drinking Starbucks. Usually the shoe's on the other foot, and I'm the one that wants to go to the
I would have preferred Starbucks.
The authentic, cool boutique coffee place, because
if you compare the sizes, mine cost about $5.50. I might not financially recover for a while from this bougie coffee I got.
It's true. And I will say during I guess we're dating this podcast still even more, but like the LA fires just happened and I lost power and I lost cell service. I had no connection to the outside world. And where I went to first was actually Starbucks. I was like, Starbucks, the strong corporate arm, they will have Wi-Fi. And I was right.
I would say it's all about community at Starbucks, and they speak to us with that beautiful logo.
It did bring together the community. I had to admit, I didn't go to the boutique cute coffee shop. I went to Starbucks. I was like,
I remember
this is an emergency.
A while ago, like in my early LA days, there was like this coffee shop, this Starbucks I went to in La Crescenta sometimes. Just like full, had all the regulars, and they all went there because it was like a clean, well-lit space, and free, and they just would. There's like 8 video editors there. There's always people there who like working on stuff. There's like a couple weird older guys that have like PCs with like gigantic power strips, like the size of a backpack that are just like, and they got lots of disheveled papers. And it's just I think
there's a place for both. I will say, I think it's important that we have our Starbucks culture and we still have the local coffee.
Just Taylor Swift and Chappell Roan, both are welcome to the music festival. Guys, I literally could talk to you forever. I'm so thankful to get the time to share this conversation with our listeners. Please do check out their Pickaxe business. Check out Intelligent Jello, which is Mike's Substack. And Ian, what's the name of your Substack?
Well, Late Arrival is kind of our thing, but
so Late Arrivals is also another banner. These guys put on events. We have the AI in the Lot series that they've been putting together with Todd Terrazas here in LA. But follow these guys to keep up and to be entertained, and also check out this amazing business of their Pickaxe. But thank you both, honestly, as for the friendship and today's conversation. For everybody listening, thank you for checking in. Please do check out curiousrefuge.com if you're interested in learning about AI and do animation, documentaries, core filmmaking course. Otherwise, we will talk soon. Thank you all.
Join the community.
yeah.
All right.
And thank you, Fred. This is
Yeah,
great.
this is a really fun conversation.
Yeah, this is great, as always.
Appreciate you guys.